So moving on now, it's time to learn about yet another fundamental concept that we use all the time in React development, and that is the children prop. So we have finished this project right here, and so we can basically finish this with Control C. And so now if we reload, you immediately see that the connection has been lost, or you could also simply have closed this VS Code window right here. Okay. And now what I want to do in this lecture and the next one, as I introduce you to the children prop, is to use the steps component that we built before. So let's go back to the steps folder and open it up in VS Code. And again, you can do that in any way that you wish. Now I will now actually duplicate this file. So this app.js in which we are working, I will copy and then paste so that we can keep the first version of the code that we wrote. So calling this one app version 1. And so now we can continue the work here in this file. All right. So let's here come to the terminal and then write npm start so that our project opens up again here in the browser. All right. Yeah, remember how we had actually included the steps component here twice. So let's remove or comment out one of them. And so yeah, it's gone. And as always, it's important to keep the console open and maybe also the components tree. But for now, let's stay on the console. Okay, so the idea of this lecture is to create a reusable button that we can use instead of these two ones here. And I want to add an emoji to these buttons here as well. So let's take a look at where they are. Yeah, so these two buttons here. Again, I now want to create a reusable button that we use instead of these two. So let's do that. And we start by using the knowledge that we already have. So let's say function button. And then all this will do is to return a button element, which should also have this style here and an on-click event handler. So let's just copy these two here. And also let's place some text here for now. And so now the idea is that we can pass in the background color, the color, this on-click handler here, and the text as props. So basically we want to accept some props here for the text color. So let's actually call that text color. So text color, background color, the on-click handler, and also the text. And so then here, let's use that button actually. So before we keep working on the button, let's include it here immediately. Let's right away delete this one. And so we use our component that we are building right now. So let's say text color should be this one here. Or actually that's the background color, of course. So BG color, then the text color. This one should be FFF for white, and then also the on-click prop. And here we want to specify the handle previous function. All right, then we close. And also the text. So here, this one said previous. And so now let's come to our button down here, and let's use these values here instead of the hard-coded values. So here, background color should be the BG prop that we received. And this one should be the text color that we receive as a prop. Then here we want on click. And here, instead of just this generic text, we want, again, the text that we receive as a prop. So let's give it a save. maybe reload even. And you see, as we use this button, it still works and looks exactly the same as before. So let's then do the same thing with this one here. So that's just copy and pasting this one and then changing the on-click handler to handle next and here next. Let's delete this button. And so now with this, we have exactly the same functionality as we had before, but we extracted these buttons that we had here into a reusable button component, which right now accepts the text color, the background, the on-click handler, and the text. So passing all these data here as props into this component should be pretty clear at this point. So hopefully you understood exactly how that works in previous lectures. But anyway, let's now say that we also want to add an emoji. So that's easy enough. We just accept that here as a prop. So emoji, and then let's add that here before the text. And let's actually create a span element for this emoji. So we create a span, and then in there, we put our emoji and then the text. Okay, and then let's actually pass that emoji in. And then let's here maybe search for finger, because I want this one here for previous. And then one finger pointing in the opposite direction for next. So that's this one. Okay, give it a save. And yeah, that worked nice. So we have our emojis and our text, and it works exactly as we specified our button down here. But now let's say that I wanted this emoji here to be on this left side, but the other emoji on the right side, so that it would say next and then pointing right to the right side. So with this, we kind of have a problem because we already have so many props. And so do you think that we should add yet another prop basically for this direction? Well, maybe not. Maybe it's getting a little bit too crazy here with all these props, and we could keep adding more and more to customize this button even more. But I think at this point we should not add, for example, this one here, like for the direction or for the side of the emoji, and instead make use of the children prop that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So instead of passing in this side here, this emoji and the text, which are basically the content here of this button element, what if we could simply pass the content right into the button as well? Or in other words, what if we could pass simply some JSX into the component, and then the component could use that JSX and simply display it? Well, we can actually do that in React. So let's come up here and notice how up until this point, all our components have always been self-closing. So we never had like this, and then any content, and then closed the element. So we never had this before, but in fact, we can do exactly this. So just like we do with HTML elements, where we have an opening tag, then some content, and then a closing tag, we can do exactly the same with React components. So here, of course, I don't want that gibberish. Let's just put it back for now. But basically what we want is to now here write that span with the emoji. So this one, and then previous. So this is exactly what we want as the content of this button. And if we were writing the button as a simple HTML button, this is what we would write. So that's actually exactly what we did write down here inside this button. And so again, we can do exactly the same thing with our React components. So then we no longer need this and this. And let's then do the same thing here. And so now comes that part where we can very easily change the direction or the side of the emoji, because we can simply write next, and then we put our emoji in the JSX on the right side. So easy, right? Well, I forgot to close our button here. Okay, and now of course you don't see any content here anymore because we no longer are passing in the text and the emoji. And so now it's time to fix this. So basically now it is time to give the button element access to whatever content we wrote into the opening tag and the closing tag. And so that's where finally the children prop comes into play. So the children prop is a prop that each React component automatically receives. And the value of the children prop is exactly what is between the opening and the closing tag of the component. So let's remove all of this. And then we simply need to write children. And so this really is a predefined keyword inside React. And so, as a final step, we can remove all of this and simply use the children here. Give it a save, and there we go. Beautiful. So we have exactly what we set out to build. We have the emoji here on the left side and here on the right side. And of course, we could do anything here. So we could have even more emojis, even more elements. And yeah, we could do really whatever we wanted. Because this content here of this element would simply be passed as the children prop into the button. And then here we use that children prop and display all that content right here inside this HTML button. And with this, we just gained a brand new and really, really important tool that is used all the time in React. It's actually one of its most useful features, I would say. And the reason for that is that it allows us to make our components truly reusable. So with this children prop, I am now able to pass whatever content I want into this button element. And the button component doesn't even need to know what content this is going to be. All it does is to take the children, so all the content and all the JSX that we just passed in, and will simply then render it inside this button component. And so because of that, we can think of the children prop as a hole that can be filled by us passing in the content into that component. And if for some reason this seems strange, don't worry, we will use this children prop all the time, all the way until the end of the course. And now, just to finish, let's quickly recap what we just did here. So, by using the children prop in the button component, we basically left an empty hole right in the component that we could then fill with any JSX markup that the component receives as children. But then the question is, how do we pass in these children? Well, when we include the button component in some JSX, instead of immediately closing the element, we can write some more JSX into that element. So just like we can write any HTML markup inside other HTML elements, right? So just like in HTML, we can write anything that we want between the opening and the closing tag of the component that we are using. So in this example, this piece of JSX creates the elements that are then the children of the button component, and they will then be accessible inside that button as props.children. So that's why we say it is the children prop. So basically, by defining child elements like this, we are passing them into the button just like we can pass in any other prop. The difference is in the way in which we specify other props, so the more regular props, and this one. So by passing in content between the opening and the closing tag of an element, we basically fill the hole that we left in the component by using props.children in the JSX of that button, so of that button component. So if we think about this, the children prop is really an ideal way of making reusable and configurable components, especially when it comes to the content of the component. So for example, let's say that we wanted to create a second similar button, but with some other emojis and text. Well, now that we know about the children prop, that is really easy. All we have to do is to pass in some different JSX, and then the button gets completely different content. And this technique is really useful for building generic components that do not know about their content before actually being used. Like, for example, a modal window, a generic slider, or simply a generic button like the one that we just built. So again, this button component had absolutely no idea about the content that it was receiving and therefore about the content that it was displaying. And so this is really amazing to create generic and reusable components. So using the children prop like this is really an extremely powerful technique that you will need to master as you learn React. But we will use this over and over again, and so there will be plenty of time to practice. And actually starting right in the next video.